P320 stuff has really gotten out of hand, honestly. Um, there's a long history of the Sig P320 at this point being the most hated firearm in the industry. And anyone who sort of comes into the firearm space at this point may encounter a lot of this Sig P320 stuff and not realize what the history is, and it's confusing. And there's a lot of people out there who are not even attempting to do right. And so, for example, they keep conflating drop safety to the issues of uncommanded discharge. Now, there was in the original generation of SIG P320s, there was a very specific angle for which you could end up with the gun going off if it was dropped. That was fixed not that early, honestly, not that early. A lot got out. I think I had two P320s before they issued the voluntary thing. And look, they didn't handle that right. That should have just been called a recall, but I don't know why they called it the voluntary upgrade program. I sent my guns in, they fixed it. For the most part, it was a trigger shoe. I already had Apex trigger shoes at the time, and so my guns personally that I used were never not drop safe because I always used an aftermarket trigger, and so it's complicated. I sent it in because I also added some mechanical changes, and they were not very transparent about any of those changes. And it's true for all of SIG products. They're not very transparent about any generational changes of their products. They don't talk about them as if they're Mark 1, Mark 2. They don't give them different model IDs so that you can track, which one has the right components and stuff like that. In fact, I've got a video on the SIG MPX where I go through this trouble of like, how can I identify that I've got new stock with the new components versus old stock, and I'm just buying it new old stock, which you don't want on certain firearms, especially the MPX at the time. The MPX, was a PCC, and it was plagued with problems. Gen 1 was horrifying. It was up until like Gen 3 that it was actually a good PCC. So you really needed to make sure, but there's no like marking that tells you, is this a good PCC? Are you getting the good one, quote unquote? TLDR, like at this point with an MPX, they're all good. But SIG are a company that have effectively beta tested with their customers, right? So I'm not going to defend them for that. These things should have been worked out. There's a question of like, when a company puts out a product, what are your expectations? And in the end, are you made good? Are you made whole? Are you happy with where you arrived? I think, to me, there's a parallel with that. The most direct parallel for that I find is Palmetto State Armory. Now, in my opinion, the products I bought from PSA have all been fantastic, except they for some reason, anything that has a thread on it, they don't use proper thread locker, at least in the generations that I bought. They don't use proper thread lock, and if you actually go use these things, the thread will work itself. Whatever's holding something down. In my case, for an AR9, it was the ejector. There's an ejector that's held in at the receiver with two set screws. Set screws worked out, ejector flew during match, dead gun, But as soon as I put some red Loctite, new ejector, it's perfect ever since. Is it forgivable? It should have been there. Their customer service always makes right. They sent me an ejector immediately and I put it in. Should I have dealt with that? Look, if it's a luxury product, like, a luxury watch, I expect it to be 100% perfect every single time and with no compromise anywhere. When I'm paying like $400 for a AR9, what can I do? But the simple thing is, I can make sure, go through any gun that I have, undo the screws, and make sure that they have Loctite on them. And that's probably the right thing to do if anything that you get, including luxury watches. Um, so I don't know how to feel about that. I think what's most important is that at the end of the day, you actually do have a product that you're happy with, and that the company hasn't like just washed their hands of it. And Sig have never done that. So if the Gen 1 P320s, they have they made good that volunteer upgrade program, you send it in, they're quick. It involved machining and everything. For sure, they didn't save money doing that. But the machining that they did was, I think, addressing an out of battery discharge issue, which I have seen in competition. So there's the drop safety issue that was solved in Gen 1, first year of production. I think, it's good. Then you had, over a longer period, more of competition shooters, almost exclusively, as best as I can tell, with X5s, Legions or otherwise, and out of battery issues. Now, in the case that I've seen an out of battery discharge, I number one, I saw it, but it plausibly wasn't out of battery. It was someone who was reloading, for like they were in their first or second month of reloading. It's completely plausible. It was like a double charge, um, you know, blew out blew out the side, blew the magazine out. It it was pretty violent, but I mean, you just put the gun and it continued going. So I think it's plausible that there were out of battery issues, especially if timing on the full size guns, especially if you use a recoil spring that's slower. There's a new hook that disengages at the back, and it's possible that your return spring, and the person who I knew was doing it, they were definitely playing around a very, very weak return spring. So the slide could have been sluggish back, disengage the disconnector, and then they fired at that time, and then went out. So those are the issues that I'm aware of that were real with the P320. You had out of battery issues on the full size X5s and the original drop safety issue. That's where it is. And during those times, for sure, Sig got a lot of hate. But you have to understand that almost immediately the Sig P320 got lots and lots and lots of hate, because at the time the real battle of striker fires was between M&P and Glock, and for sure, for the most part, Glock was winning. There wasn't really an aftermarket for M&P, despite it being a gun that had already been around for like 10 years. The P320 comes out of the bag and out of the gate, and it's an incredible gun. Basically, it has a lot of customizability, the grip module thing. Today, it still makes a whole lot of sense. It just keeps making more and more sense. And the Army picked it up. So, that's a huge event. And everyone thought like Glock would be a shoo-in. But if you looked at what the Army wanted, and if you look at the problems that they had with the M9, a lot of the problems were centered around number one, they wanted a striker fire. The DASA stuff was a little bit difficult, and number two, they wanted something that was easy to maintain, and parts like were literally modular, because they didn't want to have to send entire guns away and blah blah blah. They wanted to be able to, like, oh, if someone cracked a grip, okay, replace the grip. Someone needs this or that, okay, just replace it. So they really wanted something modular, and Glock didn't supply something that was modular. It was really that simple. I mean, even today, Glock is still sort of catching up, I think, with the Glock 47, where it's basically a Glock 17, but the internal parts, like the mating, is all Glock 19 parts. And I think centralizing around Glock 19 makes a lot of sense. So even today, the Glocks are still sort of catching up on this whole modular side of the fence, and there's actually, like, the Ruger RXP is doing that. But you got to understand, like, the Sig won the Army contract precisely because it met exactly their needs, and that was modular and maintainable and cheap. And none of these things were true of the Glock. Okay, it wasn't modular, it wasn't cheap, it wasn't easy to maintain. Like you got these punch screws and stuff like that. Um, in terms of training to be able to pull apart a Sig versus pull apart a Glock, vastly different, basically, and much more difficult. You know, the Glock is relying on its inbuilt frame, while the Sig is a chassis system. Now, maybe they don't even have to apply any kind of maintenance to the chassis, and for the most part, you don't. So it's really grip, slide, chassis, away you go. So it won very easily, and it was a cheaper firearm. And Glock's always been the most expensive striker fire. It still is today. If you go to a store, you look at what Glock is offering versus M&P versus Ruger, basically any gun, like for like, Glocks are the most expensive, or the least value. They typically ship with one more mag than the other ones, so that may be a factor in sort of coming close, but most people don't need 3 mags. So it's up to you, like how you value that. But for most customers, that it's not worth that much. So you have to understand. So okay, so Glock loses the contract, but you have to understand most of the industry was really riding on Glock. Yeah, it had the highest margins, had lots of parts in all the aftermarket was for Glock, and a lot of people had made their bed with Glock, as in we're already up to like Gen 4 at that time. Gen 5 would come not long after, and so we're talking about most people were Glock people, and so the Sig winning, there was a lot of hate, and look, the gun community is really people who love guns. They're not necessarily mechanically minded. I remember when I was new to guns, and I asked them, like, why? What makes this gun safe? And in particular, I was talking about the Ruger LCP, because as an engineer, I could pull apart a Glock and understand the mechanisms that make it safe, and that was just looking at the parts. Like I didn't need to look at a manual. I could say, okay, if this thing engages, blah blah, what do these parts do? I cannot tell what an LCP does. And the main thing that you'll see when people are talking about like safety of guns, like they don't know what they're talking about at all. Like the usual anecdote is like, oh, I carried it for like 3 years, it was fine. That's not that's not scientific. It's not mechanical. It's nothing. It's not even an anecdote, because you don't, when they say carry, you don't even know if they're carrying every day and like what kind of carry. And look, even an unsafe gun shouldn't be going off, no matter how long you carry it. You know, an unsafe. The only example of a truly unsafe gun that would just go off by shaking it is a Taurus, and you can go look at those videos. Look up Taurus and shake, and you can see it just jiggle the gun. It just literally go off. I've not seen that from any modern striker fire, but there's people out there who will claim that that's what happens with SIGs. There's no evidence of that happening. I did put a video out showing like all the safety mechanism of the SIG, and the reality is there is no difference between the safety mechanisms in the SIG versus a Glock or an M&P, in terms of how they work, or, what the importance of striker spring tension on the sear, and the nature of that tension, how it keeps it lock up. The only difference is the dongle, but the dongle only changes how drop safety is implemented. So drop safety in the M&P and the Glock, to prevent the trigger and trigger bar from going in one direction, it's done using the little dingle, and that thing prevents the trigger from moving back unless a finger is on the little dingle. The SIG does it just by having counterweights. So the trigger bar moves this way, and the trigger has to move this way for the gun to go off. So on a drop, they're both moving the same direction, so they cancel each other out. So it's possible to break a trigger dingle. It's not possible to remove the weight of the trigger bar. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter how malformed the trigger bar gets, it'll not suddenly become 0 grams of weight. Okay? So arguably the drop safety of the SIG is far more durable and far more reliable than the drop safety mechanism used on the M&P and the Glock. You can break or malform the frame, malformed little, it's a tiny piece of plastic, okay? But they both work. They both work. The benefit in certain types of tests that the dingle has is that if you're going to conduct an illegitimate test and you're going to resort to manipulating the internal mechanisms of the firearm, like I've seen in one video, if you're going to manipulate the internal mechanisms of the firearm, you know, by applying like massive force down on the sear or the trigger bar or the trigger itself, you know, but just pull the trigger basically. If you're going to do that, you can get it to basically go off without putting, you know, a finger pad on the trigger shoe. Yeah, that's the only difference. But that doesn't make the testing valid. You know what I mean? It's like I'm going to test the drop safety of a Sig by holding the gun and pulling the trigger. That doesn't make any sense. And you have to think, like, if you see a test and they're putting things inside the gun and then applying more force than you would on the trigger, what sense does that make? Okay. Now, it's okay if you don't like start manipulating internal parts. You just start, you know, like put in a clamp and then vibrate the hell out of it, take hammers and start, you know, rattling off on it. Those are actually good simulations of, you know, I'd want it to want it to pass that. Like if you've got like a paint can shaker or something like that, or a rock tumbler, throw a Sig in there, do it, absolutely. As long as you like if don't put rocks in the rock tumbler, as long as you're not literally manipulating the trigger of a rock hitting it or something. Yeah, I want to see those tests. Like, I'd love to see it. Like some sort of rig that's, you know, just vibrating the hell out of the Sig, and do it for like 20 hours. Do it for an entire year, because that's effectively what we're doing if we're carrying condition one in you know, on our belt. You know, maybe we'd get sick if we were vibrating that much as a human, but that's not really the point. That's the kind of testing that would make sense if the gun is fully assembled. Now, if you want to test an individual mechanism inside the gun, you go ahead. So that was my test. I said, I assume the sear has already failed. I don't even care how it's failed. Does the striker safety work? Pull it back. Striker safety catches it every time. If the striker safety has caught it, if the striker safety, you know, is you know, fails at some latter point, which is actually a good idea. It's a fair test. You know, maybe it slipped off the sear, striker safety did its thing, and then the safety at some point slipped off. Okay, what would happen? Well, nothing, because the spring energy only goes so far as the striker safety. If you release the striker safety, there's nothing going on. What has to happen in normal firing is that inertia will carry the striker into the primer rather than all spring pressure all the way. That's why when you fire the gun, normally you don't see the striker protruding from the firing pinhole at all times. Biker race dude. An informal union is happening between anti-gunners, lawyers, and people linked to lawsuits and Sig haters. So Sig didn't really handle this very well, and they deserve some wrath, but not to the extent that it's going to confuse new shooters or for the industry to turn on Sig. Where I come from, my background with guns is almost exclusively the competition space, and P320s are like just rampant through competition. Like there's almost no Glocks. If it's striker fire, it's a Sig P320. Merely because it's the best platform. They've really catered for competition shooters with grips that are designed for actual competition, not just holding in a gun store like this with scalloping around the thumb and, you know, bullshit like that. Or like the Glocks, you know, generations 1 through 4 with the finger grooves, you know, just bullshit stuff. Like from a competition perspective, like these other guns are relatively bullshit. P320 has a complete lock on that striker fired market for competition because they're great guns out of the gate. and the aftermarket's come out of that because the competition shooters want to game the hell out of it. Optics on the other side, I gotta say, I'm a little bit disappointed with the whole Romeo 1 stuff and the footprint being a delta point. But it does look like, it surprised me that there haven't been more optics coming out for delta point pro footprint. Just on the perspective, like, if it's what the Marines are using, why not, give them an optic choice too? But I guess unless you do get the military contracts, it's a lot of development for nothing. So, yeah, I guess. So the Leopold Delta Point Pro is still the optic, but it's like a generation like 2 optic. It's not like literally we're going to repurpose. Well, the Delta Point Pro is a rifle optic, so it is being put on, and the original RMR was too. So I think it was like RMR Gen 2 that at that point they recognized that people are putting these on pistols, and they made it a little bit better for mounting on a pistol. So yeah, I just want to say, like, the hate was right there from the beginning. It was always going to be there, purely because, like, if all Sig did was with the P320 just be completely ubiquitous in the competition space and kicking ass like that, because it does, and not win the US Army contract, I think you'd see like none of this attention. All of this attention is from, what can I say, from people who are like heavily invested in Glock, and they want to shit on it. And look, there's no gun in the industry that's worth shitting on. Okay, it's worth shitting on practices, but saying that a gun isn't safe when it is wild. It's just completely wild. Like, this doesn't help the gun community at all. Like, at all. Like, we should be focused on the companies that are actually anti-gun, like Springfield, and knife companies like Benchmade. Never buy Springfield or Benchmade. They donate to Democrats. They donate to get gun laws put in and prevent you from exercising your rights and prevent you ultimately from buying their products. But they're so short-sighted, they're part of the machine, basically. So, I've been carrying a P365 for like about a year or two, and I never spend enough time on the 365 in competition space to really ever feel comfortable with that decision. And I've got long fingers, really, really long. And after trying to go to 365, I've said, I'm going back to 320. Thankfully, in the intermediate time, the whole 320 carry type space has gotten better because the competition space has changed their rules. So it used to be the case that you couldn't carry appendix in USPSA carry optics. You can carry appendix now. It used to be that you couldn't put a light on your pistol and carry optics. You can put a light on now, and it has to be functional, if I recall. You just have to prove that it's functional. So some people have got like weights and stuff like that. But so it means that a bona fide carry setup, appendix rig, gun with a light, you're good to go. You can actually carry it in, for your daily, and then you go to competition. You don't have to change anything, so all of your practice remains relevant. So I've done so much 3 o'clock outside the waistband practice. It always irked me that the practice wasn't 100% relevant to my daily carry, and that's when I decided to shoot PCC, because I didn't want to keep practicing something with my pistol, which I may use to defend my life with. I didn't want a set of skills that were only applicable to competition. I wanted my time to be invested in, okay, yeah, it's a competition skill, but it's also 100% relevant for self-defense. So I just went to PCC because the rules wouldn't allow me to shoot my carry rig. Now I can, and so I've decided to go back to the P320. I've just got a carry X-frame for my compact gun. My Romeo 1 died on my compact, so I had to pull it off my X5. So my full-size competition gun is now like non-functioning because it doesn't have an optic on it anymore. But that's fine. I'm going to be using my compact for everything, and I'll be happy, and I'll be repping Sig in competition like I always have done because it's the best gun in the industry. Now, are there better value guns? Yeah, look, they're all really good. I'd say that the Canics look incredible. If you don't have uh, like a big interest in the whole modular aspect, the Canics are incredible. They've got a great trigger, great price. There's no issue with the Canic. The Canics look really good. I really like the look of the Ruger RXP, but for competition use, I would potentially wait and see on that one. Looks really good. Looks really good. I would wait and see. I do like the grip angle, I like mag pull, but is it going to be better than the variety of grip modules that are already offered for Sig? Probably not at the moment, but mag pull can change that. I'd love to see a large grip in that, and maybe something more competition focused would help. But out of the gate, it looks like a really good value option. Again, if you're not that interested in, say, competition or modularity, the Canic is good if you're into competition, but don't care about the modularity. Walther PDP, incredible, great trigger, best trigger in the industry. In terms of triggers, it's probably like Walther, Canic, and look, the Canic is basically a clone of the Walther, so that's why its trigger's so good. And Ruger RXP and Glock probably the same. The Glock being slightly worse but easier to modify. With Sig being around about being very glocky. They're both very mushy and kind of terrible. But here's the thing about triggers. You can look at triggers and say like the ultimate trigger is like a 1911 single stage, 2.5 pound, no creep, no over travel, no pre travel, no under travel, just zero it out, and then you discover that you end up with trigger freeze, where you literally don't, since you're not actually moving anymore, like it just you end up in a position where you're like you just can't literally pull the trigger because you haven't let off the pressure and you haven't so I see the most amount of trigger freeze on these 2011s, and I find personally that I shoot very well with the Sig's mushy trigger. Now, does it feel good? Does it it's like breaks like glass? No, it feels like crap, but I literally shoot well with it, and that's what actually matters. I think the M&P platform is starting to get really good. The only problem with the M&P is the backstrap to the trigger shoe. My long fingers, my finger ends up having to do this to actually to press the trigger, and it's just ergonomically not good for me. Didn't stop me from shooting M&P and carrying with it for more than a year. I should just recognize, I'm making excuses that I really needed a bigger grip, but I didn't realize, in the grand scheme of things, that my fingers are very long compared to most people. I didn't, I don't look at other men's hands. So I'm like, I guess I'm medium. No, I'm far from medium, is basically the answer. So I really wish I didn't spend as much money as I did on M&Ps. I've got all of them. Got a compact, I've got a full size, I've got an M&P in 9 full, and I also have, how many M&Ps do I have? I've also got a shield. Man, that is completely redundant now. So basically every M&P that I bought I kind of regret, but I used them a lot, so I can't complain too much, and they weren't that expensive. I think $400 for almost any one of them, including maybe $500 for the Performance Center full size. So, I think the M&P is a great platform, just probably not for me, just because of the ergos. Glock, I don't know. There's something about my fingers being long, and like when I grip into it, the beaver tail on the Glock is just not big enough anymore. And Rob Vogel even makes this point, like the Glock doesn't have a beaver tail that's significant. It's good for carry, but the beaver tail just isn't enough to prevent me from getting cut up. Now I'm getting a little nick on my thing. Yeah, I thought I could tough it out, but I I find that I'm not shooting as well with a Glock merely because I'm I'm getting cut. Like it's cutting my hand while I'm shooting it. Um, and so it forces me to have like a not so good grip. So I'm thinking about it. It doesn't work out well for me basically with a Glock, and it's not worth learning the different grip angles. So the M&P, the Sig, and 1911, they all have the same grip angle, so they point very well. But the Glock is the only one that I have to sort of like really push down. And look, for anyone out there who loves Glock and it works for them, I think ergonomic it does make sense to like be doing this deeper angle that the Glock angle is at. Like ergonomically, I think it's good. But for me, with the Beaver Tail, I can't commit to that platform. Now, so if there's another gun that had the angle of the Glock, I might try it. But you'd have to realize I'd be committing all of my muscle memory to the Glock, as opposed to all the other guns. It's all interchangeable to me. So it's sort of like, QWERTY keyboard, basically. It's sort of like having a QWERTY keyboard. Would you rather be really fast at, Dvorak or some other type of keyboard, or just be really good at QWERTY, and then you can go anywhere and you keep using QWERTY for life, in all these situations? Or do you want to be that guy who's like, oh, I can't really do this, not the keyboard for me? So for me, I'd prefer to just stay on the correct grip angle and not worry about which gun I have apart from Glocks. Um, and it's not like I can't literally shoot a Glock, but it will cut me up if I try to shoot it properly, and I just have to like push the nose down a little bit more. So what I'll carry is probably a big Glock, and there's just so many guns now that have the correct grip angle. So I'm not really concerned about that, but totally support someone going full Glock. It's not like retardism. you can go full Glock. It's perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. One thing that I really, really hate is this. So when people are reloading, they think it's like a John Wick thing to like, where this comes from is from Glocks, because I have a plastic magazine going into plastic housing. They get stuck unless it's like perfectly up and down. It will not drop free. It'll not drop free. So what you see is people like they just develop this part of the reload process is wiggling the gun, the Glock waggle, and forums that they talk about training scars. Glock waggle is a bloody training scar. Like I see it all the time, and people are doing it even with like 2011s and stuff like that. But those magazines weigh a lot. There's no problem. Like, why are you still waggling it? And some of it comes from like COD and John Wick, where all people who have these training scars, and you see them doing it with guns that aren't Glocks, to do the Glock waggle. Don't just my advice: never do the Glock waggle. It's not something you have to train for if you don't have a Glock. You don't have to train for it if you don't have a Glock. And if you do have a Glock, get aftermarket base pads, add an extra ounce of weight to each magazine, and then you'll have a magazine that probably will drop free. The other thing I would do is use a silicone lube or a dry lube to make it a little bit easier to drop free. I mean, hey, look, it's hacky, but you're dealing with plastic on plastic. It has friction. That's all there is to it. There's a friction on it, so you got to clean those mags, clean those mag bodies, apply a little bit of dry lube to it or something. Make it work. Make it work. It's like, as long as it's working, that's cool. Perfectly fine. But try not to develop, Glock waggle. It's reloading's hard enough than dealing with that. Okay. Last but not least, optics. Yeah, I've been really since the Romeo 1 died, I literally have a dead X5, and I kind of like that as just a range toy. It won't be my competition gun, but if I'm showing a new shooter like how to shoot, it'd be nice if I had like a full size, just an easy gun. And I've typically, it's been my full size competition gun, but since I took the Romeo 1 off it, it now doesn't have an optic. So I've seen people do Delta Point Pros with adapter plates, and because there's no lugs for the recoil, it typically ends up at some point, like 7 or 8 matches in, just flying into their face on recoil. I've seen that a few times. I told my friend, like, the next time that happens to you, where your optic flies off the gun, hits you in the face, keep fucking going. Like, he's like, because last time, like, it happened to him 2 times already, and it killed his match because he had to stop. And I said, why did you stop? You've trained really well, just your natural point, and you still have a front sight on there. But even just your pointing, like if you're good at red dot, your natural point of aim is like very, very close to just getting, Charlie's, getting not A zone, but close to A zone, certainly center of A zone, but you're not far off from just hitting A zones under 10 yards anyway of your natural point of aim. And certainly him at his practice level it did. So I told him, just next time it happens to you, just keep going. You're not being negligent because you don't literally have a red dot sight. Your point of aim and your point of references on the gun, those are okay. Okay, it's not negligent to shoot when your skill level is that high. You're not sending rounds over the berm or something like that. Your natural point of aim, since you're all red dot, is friggin' spot on. So complete. And next time he did it, yeah, he got a few more Charlies, but he wasn't shooting deltas. Even after being fucking hit in the face with an optic flying at him. So, but I don't want a Delta Point Pro and I don't want an adapter plate, but I'm not sure what options I have. There's a C and H Precision who'll do an optic cut for either RMR holes or Delta Point Pro. The problem with the RMR one is, I think on the X5, there's nothing holding the RMR on there. So I think the only way to get it, lug holes and stuff like that, is for it to be cut for Romeo 1 Pro, and then get the adapter plate that actually fills out the space properly and then has lug holes for the RMR footprint. The other option is the Vortex Defender XL. I'm not a big fan of Defender optics. Vortex optics, or red dot optics anyway. Hop did a really good video on the Defender showing it had like really bad battery life and refresh rate, and that concerns me a lot. And I don't know where you can even get to see these things these days. I might go to Bass Pro Shop or something like that and see if they've got any optics on the shelf that I can try out, because it doesn't seem. I don't know. I guess I have to see it in person before I commit, because this is a lot of money. We're talking like $500 for the optic, maybe $400, and then I think $140 to cut to do the Romeo 1 Pro cut. I don't know. I don't know what sounds right. I could go for Romeo 1 Pro cut and do the adapter plate, that's even more money, and then just go with the Holosun. Now, I absolutely like Holosun. I would definitely do a 507 comp over a Defender XL, but maybe the Defender XL gets me to what I need for slightly less money. But then I'm committing to Delta Point Pro footprint. I really wish Sig never did the Romeo 1 Pro, Delta Point Pro footprint. I wish it was just RMR. But look, at the time, Trijicon didn't have a pistol-based optic either. So Delta Point Pro, even though that's not a pistol optic, it just made the most sense at the time. It was the most used in the military, so they were just going with the flow, I guess. All right, that's enough rambling about the Sig P320. I just implore you guys out there who are conducting your own like experiments or thought experiments, like really, what are you testing? And if you see a test, like be skeptical. What exactly is being tested there? If you see a video of a gun going off, well, it's like we don't just need to see the gun go off. We need to see what's actually wrong with the gun. Like these are mechanical objects. You can inspect them just by looking at them. It's not like software on a computer where it's compiled and you don't know how it works under the hood. No, we have the mechanical object at hand. So let's see what's wrong if it's actually wrong. Now a lot of these we don't know. There's plenty of discharges and holsters of Glocks and other firearms. You don't see like people making a huge issue out of it. And I'm saying those are issues, but I need to see what's wrong with the firearm. I need to see what went wrong. Usually it's a deformed holster, like a jacket drawstring got caught in the holster, a piece of t-shirt got caught up in the holster and they holstered anyway. It just comes down to people just doing the big macho thing of like looking forward and so straight in the holster without like actually looking down at the holster. Is it clear? Like, no one won a gunfight by holstering quickly. Is basically it. Like, you got to be very careful when holstering a gun condition one. I think I'll leave it at that. Okay. Till next time. See you around.